Chapter 1. The Veil and the Mirror. They never show you the fangs at first. They smile. It's not the monsters that howl in the night you should fear. It's the ones who whisper your name like a lullaby. The ones who study your dreams. Not to help you reach them, but to wear them like a mask while they drain you dry. Manipulation. It does not come cloaked in shadows. It walks in daylight, with a handshake, a compliment, a gaze that lingers just long enough to seem sincere. It doesn't strike, it weaves, like a spider tracing invisible threads through your soul. Until one day, you find yourself dancing to a rhythm that isn't yours. And you can't remember when the music started. This world is not neutral. Every glance, every word, every silence. It either empowers or extracts. And if you don't understand the game, you're the board. So here you are, waking up. That first burn in the chest isn't fear. It's clarity. It's what the ancient Stoics called anamnesis, a soul remembering what it was always meant to see. We live in a world of influence, covert, calculated, relentless, where social media engineers your emotion, where politicians don't argue, they seduce, where narcissists thrive not because they are strong, but because you were never taught how to see the strings. Let me tell you a truth carved in steel. Power is neither good nor evil. It is simply presence, directed. And if you do not claim your mind, someone else will. You must learn to see the invisible. You must unmask the charm. Read between the flattery. Recognize the way false praise is a leash with a velvet collar. You must look into their eyes, not the eyes they show you, but the ones hidden behind their words. Because manipulation isn't just what's done to you. It's what's invited when you fear confrontation more than corruption. Look to history. Carnegie built empires with persuasion, but knew when to walk away from false allies. Lincoln mastered language not just to unite, but to reveal intention. Edison outmaneuvered the greatest minds not with brute force, but with psychological chess moves 10 steps ahead. Do you think they didn't face manipulators? They thrived because they recognized them. Now, let's make something clear. This isn't about paranoia. It's about precision. Not fear, but awareness sharpened like a blade. The world doesn't need more cynics. It needs warriors who walk into rooms and see. Because if you don't know the game, you are the game. And every minute you doubt your worth, there is someone nearby rehearsing exactly how to exploit it. Ask yourself, have you ever apologized for something you didn't do, just to keep the peace? Have you ever felt guilt woven into praise? Have you ever been gaslit into questioning your own memory, your own intuition, your own truth? That is not weakness. That is programming. They studied you before you knew yourself. They found your longing to belong, your hunger for approval, your secret fear of being too much or not enough. And they shape their words like daggers dipped in honey. But this is the moment the spell cracks. Right now. You are not here to become paranoid. You are here to become precise. Because the manipulator's greatest weapon is ambiguity. If they can blur your vision, they control the map. But if you name their tactics, gaslighting, triangulation, mirroring, future faking, if you bring the shadows into the light, they lose their grip. Let me say this again. Naming a tactic is the first act of power. Because the second you recognize the game, you are no longer a pawn. You become the player. But don't be fooled into thinking this is about intellect alone. Manipulators don't win because they're smarter. They win because they read emotion. They weaponize empathy. They mirror your soul until you see yourself in them. And then once you trust them, they twist it. It's not the logic they aim to deceive. It's the heart. So you must train both. Your mind must be an analyst. Your spirit, a sentinel. Your intuition, sacred ground. Never again will you second-guess the feeling that something is off. Never again will you shrink to keep someone comfortable. Because the cost of silence is your sovereignty. You were not made to be manipulated. You were made to rise. This awakening will not be soft. It will not be easy. Because when you start to see the patterns, you see how deep the rabbit hole goes. You see how often we mistake charisma for character. How society rewards those who speak loudest, not those who speak truth. But truth is your sword now. And discernment your shield. You will start noticing the signs. The way they dodge accountability, the way they turn questions into accusations, the way they fragment your reality piece by piece, until you question your own reflection. Not anymore. You are the mirror now. You are the one who reflects their truth back at them. Unmasked, unfiltered, unafraid. But understand this. Once you see the strings, you must decide what to do with that knowledge. Because power without integrity is just manipulation in disguise. And you are not here to become what hurt you. You are here to transcend it. There is a difference between shielding yourself and shutting down. Between boundaries and walls. You are not becoming cold. You are becoming clear. Clear in your values. Clear in your perception. Clear in your decision to no longer betray yourself to keep peace with others. You don't have to match their darkness. You only need to master your light. Because while the manipulator uses darkness to confuse, the sovereign mind uses clarity to command. Let this chapter be your threshold. Let it rip away the blindfold. You are not naive. You are awakening. And every manipulation you've survived wasn't just a wound. It was a rehearsal. For the moment you stepped into this version of yourself. Eyes open. Voice steady. Spirit unshakable. They will still come. The smooth talkers. The gaslighters. The ones who think they can still mold you like clay. But they will find iron. Because from this moment forward, you know what to look for. You know what you will no longer tolerate. And you know what it means to reclaim the most sacred thing they tried to take from you. Your mind. And that is where the real story begins. Chapter 2. The Anatomy of Influence. They don't come for your mind with force. They come with finesse. They don't knock on the door of your logic. They slip through the cracks of your insecurity. They watch you more closely than you watch yourself. They observe your habits, your language, your insecurities, your aspirations. They learn your cadence, your emotional rhythm, the pitch of your voice when you're excited, the silence you carry when you're ashamed. And slowly, methodically, they begin crafting a version of themselves that you will let your guard down for. Not because they admire you, not because they respect you, but because manipulation is never a spontaneous act. It is a constructed architecture of control built brick by brick from your own psychology. You must understand, this is not the manipulation of fiction. This is not the overt coercion you've seen in movies, where villains announce their plans and give you time to run. No, this is the real-world game of subtlety, of influence hidden beneath intention. This is the boss who gives you just enough praise to keep you chasing more. This is the partner who weaponizes your vulnerability to create dependency, not intimacy. This is the friend who always makes you feel like you owe them for something, even if you can't put your finger on what. And if you've never studied the architecture of influence, then you've been its victim. Not once, but constantly. Influence, in its purest form, is not inherently evil. In fact, every human relationship is built on some degree of it. But the manipulator doesn't want to influence you in alignment with truth. They want to influence you in alignment with advantage. Their advantage. Their agenda. Their emotional economy, where you are the currency and they are the collector. The terrifying part? They often don't even need to consciously plan it. Many manipulators operate from an instinct honed by years of navigating human frailty. Like a predator doesn't need to analyze every step of the hunt. It just knows how to move when it smells weakness. That's why awareness isn't optional. It's survival. When Andrew Carnegie built his empire, he didn't just understand steel, he understood men. He knew how to make them feel seen, valued, indispensable. But what separated Carnegie from the covert manipulators of today was intent. He used influence to build, to elevate, to grow. The manipulator uses influence to trap, to exploit, to reduce you into a role in their story, never giving you the pen to write your own. And herein lies the core truth. The difference between healthy influence and toxic manipulation is that influence respects your freedom. Manipulation removes it while convincing you that you're still in control. The most dangerous part? You don't feel the cage being built. It doesn't come with bars. It comes with doubt, with confusion, with small compromises that slowly alter your internal compass until you can no longer tell whether you're acting from your own will or someone else's narrative. You second-guess your reactions, apologize for your instincts, silence your truth in favor of maintaining the illusion of harmony. And all the while, the manipulator feeds off your disorientation. Let's go deeper. One of the most effective tools in the manipulator's arsenal is mirroring, not the healthy, empathic mirroring used to build connection, but a calculated mimicry designed to create artificial intimacy. They observe your values and then reflect them back to you. They simulate your emotional language. They align themselves with your beliefs not because they share them, but because it makes you drop your guard. You begin to feel, finally, someone who understands me. But understand this clearly, being understood is not the same as being safe. True safety comes not from someone understanding your emotions, but from someone respecting them. That's the line the manipulator crosses. They do not respect your emotions. They study them. They gather them like ammunition. They replicate your worldview just long enough to earn your trust, then slowly replace your internal world with one where they hold the keys to your validation. They do not dominate you with fear. They dominate you with confusion, with psychological sleight of hand. It's what the philosopher Nietzsche alluded to when he wrote that people don't want the truth, they want reassurance. And manipulators thrive on that need. They become your source of emotional reassurance. They isolate you from your inner knowing and then become your new compass. This is how cult leaders rise. This is how abusive relationships persist for years. This is how power becomes a drug and trust becomes a trap. You need to train your perception to detect manipulation not when it is obvious, but when it is beautifully disguised. You need to recognize when someone is creating dependency under the pretense of devotion. When someone praises you, not to uplift you, but to keep you predictable. When someone creates a dynamic where you begin to crave their approval like oxygen. Let me give you a harsh truth. Not everyone who claims to love you is capable of doing so. Not everyone who says they're loyal actually believes in mutual respect. Sometimes love is a leash. Sometimes loyalty is a contract written in silence and guilt. And unless you redefine what safety means to you, you will continue giving your power to people who do not deserve it. This is why clarity is a weapon. Not a weapon of harm, but of defense. Clarity allows you to see where confusion has been planted. It allows you to recognize manipulation not just in words, but in patterns. The pattern of always feeling like you're the one compromising. The pattern of walking away from conversations feeling smaller than you walked in. The pattern of being made to feel crazy for having perfectly logical reactions. These are not accidents. These are not personality quirks. These are patterns, and patterns reveal truth. It's the same principle that Thomas Edison used in invention. He didn't just stumble into greatness. He tested, observed, refined. He saw what others missed because he trained himself to see not just what was, but what was off. That is what you must now do with people. You must become a psychological scientist, not cold or skeptical, but discerning. Discerning enough to recognize when influence turns into manipulation. Discerning enough to walk away from charm when it lacks character. Because character, true character, cannot be faked for long. It's revealed in conflict, in pressure, in how someone responds when they don't get their way. That is when the mask slips. That is when you must be watching. You want to protect yourself? Then stop seeking comfort from those who have proven they cannot handle your truth. Stop silencing your gut to preserve relationships that drain you. Stop negotiating your boundaries to earn proximity to people who only value what you can offer them, not who you are without the performance. And when that blindness lifts, when the fog clears, when the patterns become visible, there is no going back. You see the world for what it is. You begin to understand that manipulation thrives not in evil, but in ambiguity. It needs your silence, your confusion, your guilt. You want to destroy manipulation? Name it. Speak it. Call it out. Not always with confrontation, but with conscious disconnection. Sometimes the most powerful form of resistance is simply choosing not to play the game. Chapter 3. The Illusion of Control. Control. That's what it always comes down to, not power in its raw form, not force, not domination in the obvious ways you can see and fight against, but the illusion of control, the invisible strings that wrap around your choices so carefully, so silently, that by the time you feel restricted, you're not even sure whether someone else tied the knots or whether you tied them yourself. That is the brilliance and the brutality of psychological manipulation. It doesn't require chains. It only requires consent, your unconscious, conditioned, deeply emotional consent, given moment by moment, situation by situation, until you wake up in a life that no longer reflects your values but mirrors someone else's agenda. Manipulators don't need to own your body. They only need to lease your mind. They don't start by telling you what to do. They begin by asking questions that subtly redefine your standards, by offering validation that feels like affection but is really a leash. They learn what you want most and then position themselves as the gatekeeper to that desire. They study what you fear and slowly wrap themselves around that fear like armor, making you believe that proximity to them means safety. But what they are really doing is building a dependence, a psychological link between their presence and your sense of identity, your confidence, your worth. They don't shout. They whisper. They don't demand. They suggest. And the suggestions are always framed with just enough warmth, just enough plausible kindness, that you question your own resistance to them. You begin to rationalize. You tell yourself this is what compromise looks like. That love is sacrifice. That loyalty means letting things slide. But what you don't realize is that compromise becomes corrosion when it's one-sided. That love becomes a performance when it is purchased by the slow erosion of self. Do you know what real control looks like? It's not chains and cages. It's when you think you're making your own decisions, but every choice has been subtly steered. When you think you're staying in the relationship because it's love, but really it's fear of abandonment, reinforced by years of emotional conditioning. When you think you're agreeing to something at work because it's your role, but actually it's because you've been trained to believe that asserting yourself is selfish. Manipulators don't just change how you think, they change how you think about thinking. They plant ideas that seem like your own. They lead you to conclusions that benefit them. They create scenarios where your silence is the only acceptable answer. And they smile while doing it because their power does not come from brute force. It comes from subtlety. This is why self-awareness is not optional. This is why self-ownership is not just a spiritual phrase. It is a psychological armor. If you do not understand your own mind, someone else will. And they will not use it to protect you. They will use it to sculpt a version of you that serves their needs. You must examine your decisions ruthlessly. You must question where your motivations come from. You must ask yourself, again and again, am I doing this because I choose it, or because I've been conditioned to choose it? You must learn to recognize the pressure points, the guilt traps, the emotional blackmail hidden in compliments, the way some people give just enough to keep you hopeful, while never offering true partnership. The way they disappear when you set boundaries and then return just in time with enough sweetness to make you question if you overreacted. That's not kindness. That's calibration. They're adjusting the dial of your psyche, testing how much they can bend you before you break, and how much they can take before you notice. It is psychological warfare, dressed as connection. And this war is not fought in dramatic arguments or public betrayals. It is fought in the micro moments. In the way your voice lowers when they disapprove. In the way you rewrite your text to avoid setting them off. In the way you stop sharing your achievements because it makes them distant. In the way you shrink not because they asked you to, but because over time, your expansion made you feel like a threat to their control. They don't want you to leave. They want you to stay, but stay small. Stay uncertain. Stay just confident enough to function, but never so confident that you realize you deserve more. And here's where the illusion becomes most dangerous, when you begin to think that you are the one in control, that your decisions are strategic, that your compromises are voluntary, that you are managing the situation. But in truth, you are not managing it, you are being managed. Because if they can get you to think that you are choosing the cage, then they never have to defend the walls. That's the difference between a manipulator and a leader. A leader expands your freedom. A manipulator makes you believe you're free, while limiting your choices. Now, you may ask, how do I know the difference? How do I know if I'm being influenced or manipulated? You know by how you feel after. Not during. During it often feels good. Manipulation rarely feels toxic in the moment. It feels euphoric. Addictive. Like connection. But after? That's where the truth hides. If after every interaction you feel drained, confused, guilty, smaller, then you are not in a relationship, you are in a psychological transaction where your energy is the currency. And the manipulator? They never pay. They collect. This is why emotional intelligence is not about being nice. It's about being sovereign. It's about recognizing not just your emotions, but the emotional patterns of others. It's about seeing the ways people twist your empathy into a weakness, and deciding that your kindness will never again come at the cost of your clarity. You are not here to be a servant to someone else's emotional dysfunction. You are not here to be the mirror someone else uses to validate their illusion. You are not here to be applauded for your obedience while your soul is slowly dismantled. You're here to think, to see, to choose. That is the first real act of freedom, choosing to look behind the curtain, even if what you find there shatters the narrative you've been living in. Choosing to believe your own instincts, even if everyone else tells you you're wrong. Choosing to detach, even when it's hard, because you've finally understood that closeness without respect is just a slow emotional death. And when you do this, when you choose awareness over comfort, clarity over illusion, sovereignty over control, something extraordinary happens. The manipulator loses their grip. Not because they let go, but because you're no longer holding the rope. And in that moment, you stop being the puppet. You become the author. Not of their story, of yours. Chapter 4. The Hijacking of Belief. Belief is the engine of everything. It is not just an abstract thought or a passive idea you keep tucked away in the back of your mind. Belief is the architect of your reality, the foundation of your decisions, the blueprint of your future, and when someone tampers with your belief, especially about yourself, they are not just influencing your behavior, they are reprogramming your entire existence. That's why manipulators aim straight for it. They don't waste time arguing facts or challenging logic directly. They bypass your conscious resistance and go straight for the software that governs your perception. They plant ideas not as statements, but as seeds, and over time, those seeds become internalized truths. Not because they're true, but because you lived with them long enough to forget they were never yours to begin with. The most successful manipulators do not impose belief. They guide you toward adopting it yourself. They know that if they can make you feel something, shame, guilt, obligation, fear, that emotion will do far more to shape your belief system than any argument or command. They understand that the most powerful form of control is self-regulation. If they can get you to monitor yourself, punish yourself, limit yourself, then they no longer have to. You become the enforcer of their agenda, convinced it's your own will. This is how people lose themselves. Not in a single moment of surrender, but over time, through a gradual process of internal erosion. You start with strong beliefs. You know what you want, what you stand for, what matters. But the manipulator doesn't confront those beliefs directly. They chip away at them subtly. They ask why you believe what you believe, not to understand you, but to inject doubt. They frame your convictions as rigidity, your standards as selfishness, your boundaries as coldness. And slowly, you begin to question not just your ideas, but your right to hold them. It is a psychological theft, carried out in broad daylight. Most people never recover from this, because they never fully realize what was taken. They walk through life unsure of themselves, disconnected from their own voice, mistaking silence for wisdom and conflict avoidance for peace. They don't realize they are operating on beliefs that were installed by people who wanted to keep them small, manageable, predictable. That's the true cost of manipulation. It doesn't just hurt you in the moment. It reshapes who you think you are. But here's the turning point. You can reclaim your beliefs. You can strip away the layers that were never yours. You can return to the raw, untamed version of yourself that existed before you were taught to doubt your intuition, before you were punished for being too intense or too ambitious or too aware. Because the truth is, your original beliefs, the ones formed not out of fear, but out of clarity, are still there, buried beneath years of mental noise. This reclamation begins with asking one fundamental question. Whose voice is this? When you hear yourself hesitate before speaking your truth, pause and ask, whose disapproval are you trying to avoid? When you find yourself minimizing your achievements, shrinking your presence, softening your tone, who are you still trying to make comfortable? That voice in your head that says you're too much, too emotional, too opinionated? Who put it there? Because once you identify the origin of the false belief, it begins to lose its power. Once you shine the light on where the programming came from, whether it was a parent, a teacher, a partner, a boss, or society itself, you can start to detach from it. Not with rage, not with blame, but with clarity. With the quiet conviction that your mind is no longer a free market for outside influence. That your belief system will no longer be auctioned off to the loudest voice or the most persuasive manipulator. Understand this. Belief is not something you receive, it is something you build. Brick by brick. Experience by experience. And if someone else has laid that foundation for you, it is not only your right to question it, it is your responsibility. Because until you do, you will always be living in someone else's design. And here's where it gets even more dangerous. Manipulators rarely stop at shaping your beliefs about yourself. They go further. They shape your beliefs about what's possible. They convince you that dreaming too big is unrealistic. That asking for more is ungrateful. That changing direction is irresponsible. Because a person who believes in possibility is dangerous to anyone who benefits from their stagnation. A person with vision cannot be manipulated with fear. A person who knows their worth cannot be guilt-tripped into staying small. Henry Ford once said, "Whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right." That wasn't just a motivational quote. It was a warning. Because your belief sets the ceiling for your reality. If someone has convinced you that you can't, then you won't. Not because it's true, but because your mind won't even allow the possibility to take shape. That is how deep belief goes. It is the filter through which every opportunity, every risk, every relationship is interpreted. So here is your power. You get to rewrite the code. Not just challenge what you believe, but choose what to believe next. You get to decide that confidence is not arrogance. That clarity is not cruelty. That boundaries are not punishments. They are acts of self-respect. You get to rebuild your mental framework so that it reflects you, not the fragments of other people's control. This is not easy. It requires deep, painful honesty. You will have to confront the parts of yourself that still crave approval. You will have to face the fact that for years, maybe decades, you handed over parts of your mind to people who never earned the right to shape it. You will have to walk away from relationships that depend on your continued compliance. And you will have to build new beliefs in the face of old doubts. But on the other side of that process? Freedom. Not the kind of freedom that looks good on social media, but the kind that makes you unshakable. The kind that lets you walk into any room, manipulators present or not, and know that your mind is not up for negotiation. The kind of freedom that makes people respect you, not because you demand it, but because your presence makes it clear you will not entertain anything less. Belief is your compass. And when it's aligned with truth, you cannot be steered off course, no matter how many distractions, temptations, or deceptions are thrown your way. When your beliefs are yours, truly yours, manipulation becomes obvious. Influence becomes transparent. And control, once so subtle and so persuasive, shatters in the presence of a person who knows who they are and what they stand for. Because the manipulator's greatest fear isn't confrontation. It's clarity. And belief is the root of that clarity. You want to protect yourself? Then protect your beliefs. Guard them like sacred ground. Question them, refine them, shape them, but never again allow anyone to install them without your consent. That is how you take your mind back. That is how you rebuild your life, not from someone else's script, but from your own blueprint. This is where belief stops being a passive identity and becomes your weapon, your armor, and your guide. Chapter 5. The Weapon of Clarity. Clarity is the sharpest weapon you will ever wield, not because it's loud or aggressive, but because it strips away illusion with surgical precision. Clarity doesn't argue. It doesn't shout. It simply removes the fog. It silences the noise. It lets you see what was always there, hiding in plain sight. In a world obsessed with appearances, with carefully managed impressions and social performances, clarity is subversive. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't flatter anyone's ego. It just reveals. And once something is seen clearly, it cannot be unseen. That is the beginning of liberation, and the reason manipulators work so hard to distort your perception before they even touch your decisions. Manipulators do not fear confrontation. They do not fear resistance. What they truly fear is clarity, your ability to recognize patterns, to name the game, to stop reacting emotionally and start observing structurally. Because once you understand the architecture of a manipulative relationship, its recurring cycles, its language of control, its invisible contracts of obligation, then you are no longer caught in it. You are above it. You are analyzing it instead of absorbing it. And in that space, they lose their grip. Because control depends on confusion. Without confusion, manipulation cannot breathe. Think of every manipulative dynamic you've ever endured. There was always a moment, maybe early, maybe years in, where something felt off. Where your gut stirred, where your body tensed, where your intuition whispered that something didn't align. But you overrode it. You talked yourself out of it. You intellectualized it, rationalized it, softened it. Because clarity is inconvenient when you're emotionally invested. Because seeing the truth means facing the cost of change. And so, we choose the illusion. Not because we're weak, but because we're human. But the cost of avoiding clarity is always higher than the pain of facing it. The longer you wait to confront what you already know deep down, the more control you surrender. The more energy you spend managing someone else's behavior instead of standing firmly in your own truth. The more you become a participant in your own manipulation, not just a victim of it. And this is where most people remain stuck, not in trauma, but in ambivalence. In that gray space where you know something isn't right but haven't yet summoned the courage to name it. Because naming it means you'll have to do something about it. And that threatens the fragile comfort you've built on top of confusion. But here's the truth no one tells you. Clarity doesn't destroy real connection. It only threatens the false ones. If your truth ends a relationship, that relationship was built on false premises. If your honesty offends someone, that person was never at peace with who you really are. If setting a boundary causes someone to walk away, they were only there to benefit from your compliance, not to honor your sovereignty. This is why clarity isn't just a concept. It's a filter. It separates the real from the fake, the grounded from the manipulative, the honest from the opportunistic. And it does so without drama. That's what makes it so powerful. It's not reactive. It's not vengeful. It doesn't need validation. It just sees, and from seeing it knows. And from knowing, it acts, not from fear or revenge, but from alignment. That's the life you begin to build when you stop asking, what do they want me to think? And start asking, what do I actually see? When you stop relying on approval to define your truth and start using discernment as your compass. When you stop second-guessing yourself just because someone else is uncomfortable with your clarity. You have to understand something. We were raised in systems that benefit from our confusion. Institutions, relationships, cultural norms, they often function better when you don't ask too many questions. When you internalize the rules without inspecting them. When you believe the lie that being agreeable is more important than being authentic. But manipulators thrive in that exact space. They exploit politeness. They exploit your need to be liked, to be seen as good, to be emotionally available. And as long as you let that need override your clarity, they will always have a way in. Clarity requires that you stop trying to be everything to everyone and start being fully committed to yourself. It requires that you step away from the noise, emotionally, mentally, even physically, and create space to hear your own inner signals. Because clarity doesn't come from the outside. It doesn't come from what people tell you or what the world expects of you. It comes from silence, from reflection, from stripping away every borrowed opinion and every conditioned belief until only truth remains. When Walt Disney pursued his vision for Disneyland, he faced endless ridicule. People told him it was a fantasy, a financial disaster waiting to happen. But he wasn't confused. He was clear. He saw something others couldn't yet see. And that clarity became his compass. He didn't need consensus. He didn't need mass approval. Because when you're truly clear, external validation becomes irrelevant. The vision speaks for itself. The alignment becomes louder than the doubt. That's the version of yourself you must now embrace. Not the reactive self who adjusts to every manipulative dynamic, but the grounded self who sees through it, who names it, who exits it, without apology, without guilt, without a performance. Because clarity isn't about explaining yourself to others. It's about explaining yourself to yourself. It's about walking into every situation with the unwavering sense that you know what you're looking at. You know what you're dealing with. You know who you are, what you value, and where you're going. And no one, not a manipulative partner, not a persuasive liar, not a social system built on deceit, can take that away from you once you've seen the game for what it is. So, train yourself to see without flinching. Learn to analyze patterns, not just people. Learn to trust behavior over words. Learn to measure relationships not by how they feel in fleeting moments of affection, but by how they function over time. Learn to believe yourself, your perception, your intuition, your emotional logic, especially when it contradicts what others want you to believe. Clarity will cost you things. False peace, shallow connections, illusions of safety. But it will give you something greater. It will give you yourself. And that is a trade worth making every single time. Chapter 6. The Architecture of Vision. A life without vision is a life at the mercy of other people's agendas. It's not an accident that manipulators target people who lack direction, because when you don't know where you're going, it's far too easy to follow someone else's map. Vision is not some dreamy, abstract idea that you throw around in motivational speeches. It's the single most practical and strategic form of psychological self-defense. It's the structure around which everything else in your life is either organized or disorganized. And if you don't build that structure deliberately, someone else will gladly build it for you, and you will live inside their vision, wondering why you constantly feel like a visitor in your own life. Vision is clarity, projected forward. It's not just about what you want to achieve, it's about the world you're committed to building, the values you're willing to protect, the energy you refuse to waste. It's the conscious declaration that your mind is not available for rent, your time is not on sale, and your soul is not up for negotiation. That declaration, made privately and reinforced daily, creates a psychological environment where manipulation cannot take root. Not because it doesn't try, but because there's no soil for it to grow in. Let's make something absolutely clear. Manipulators thrive in chaos, in ambiguity, in emotional fog. They don't just want you confused about them, they want you confused about yourself. They don't want you rooted, they want you reactive. Because reactivity is predictable, and predictability is manipulability. But a person with vision, true vision, is not reactive. They respond with precision. They move with direction. They don't just walk away from manipulation, they see it coming and sidestep it before it even arrives. This is why vision is so dangerous to those who seek to control. Because when your vision is intact, you cannot be seduced by short-term validation. You're not addicted to applause, because your purpose is not defined by noise. You don't crumble under criticism, because your worth was never up for public vote. You don't need every relationship to survive, because you're building something far bigger than emotional dependency. And that threatens every manipulator in your life who once relied on your neediness to keep you close. Look at the great builders of history, visionaries who saw what others could not. Nikola Tesla, who envisioned a world lit by wireless energy and endured a lifetime of rejection and theft without losing sight of what he knew to be possible. Abraham Lincoln, whose vision for a united America outlived the bullets of division. Martin Luther King Jr., who carried a vision of justice so clearly that it outlasted the body that spoke it. These were not passive dreamers. They were strategic architects of a future that did not yet exist, but they walked in it mentally long before it took physical form. What made them immune to manipulation was not superhuman strength. It was vision. Vision that kept them anchored when the world tried to shake them. Vision that kept their minds clear when lies and pressure and betrayal tried to sway them. That's the kind of vision you need to cultivate now, not for fame, not for external validation, but because without it, you are a magnet for distraction, a puppet for louder voices, a slave to emotional hijacking. You want to protect yourself from manipulation? Then give your life a North Star. Build it from the inside out. Name what matters. Declare what's non-negotiable. Define the life you refuse to live, so you never wander into it by accident. Your vision does not have to make sense to others. It does not need to be understood, approved, or applauded. It just needs to be real. Real to you. Aligned with your values. And strong enough to become the foundation of your behavior. Not your mood, not your impulses, not your emotional weather, but your principles. The most effective manipulators are not obvious villains. They are often clever enough to position themselves as allies of your dream. They'll tell you what you want to hear. They'll align themselves with your goals, on the surface. But beneath that, they are steering. Not in big, dramatic gestures, but in subtle pivots. They will influence your definition of success. They will redefine your values through the lens of their own agenda. And if you don't have your own vision locked in, you won't notice that you're moving, slowly but surely, in the wrong direction. Vision is not only a direction. It's also a filter. It tells you what to say yes to, what to say no to, who belongs in your life and who only appears to. It teaches you to ask, does this relationship reinforce my future or distract from it? Does this job support my values or silently sabotage them? Does this habit bring me closer to who I want to be, or is it a high-priced anesthetic for the pain of not living in alignment? These questions are brutal, but they're essential, because nothing protects you from manipulation more than a life built on deliberate decisions. Without vision, you will settle for relationships that drain you, for careers that numb you, for routines that hollow you out. And every manipulative person you meet will offer you just enough attention, affection, or distraction to keep you from noticing that you're slowly abandoning yourself. And it will feel like connection. It will feel like support. But it will be a transaction, one that robs you of your direction in exchange for fleeting validation. Rebuilding your vision means recovering the part of you that remembers what you wanted before you were told what to want. Before the conditioning. Before the compromises. Before the roles you were expected to play became masks you couldn't take off. It means going back. Not to stay there, but to retrieve the truth you buried under the noise. And then, from that truth, designing a future that honors it. You don't need to have it all figured out. Vision doesn't mean you know every step. It means you know the why. And when the why is strong enough, the how becomes a matter of time. But you have to hold on to that vision with a grip that cannot be broken by persuasion, by manipulation, by charm, or by the ever-changing opinions of people who do not share your commitment. Because people will project their limits onto you. They will cloak their envy in false concern. They will tell you to be more realistic, to slow down, to tone it down, to be more like them. Not because they care about your well-being, but because your clarity threatens the excuses they've made for staying stuck. Your progress exposes their stagnation. And instead of doing the work, they will try to convince you to stop. Don't. Let them stay where they are if they choose to. But you must move forward. Not recklessly. Not to prove anything. But because your vision is sacred. Because a life built without it is a life built in pieces, easily dismantled by anyone who knows where you're most uncertain. But a life built on vision? That life is bulletproof. That life is owned. That life is yours. Chapter 7. The Fortress of Discipline. Discipline is not restriction, it is protection. It is not the absence of freedom, it is the architecture that preserves it. People misunderstand this because they confuse chaos with freedom, and they confuse comfort with peace. But real peace, the kind that lasts, the kind that you don't have to constantly chase or fake, is born inside discipline. Not because discipline is pleasant or easy or emotionally thrilling, but because it creates order around your values, structure around your priorities, and clarity around your commitments. And in a world full of distractions, temptations, manipulations, and false promises, discipline is the only thing that keeps you from becoming prey to your environment. Every manipulator counts on your lack of discipline. Because without it, you will always be reactive. You will always be seduced by the emotional high of approval, the sugar rush of validation, the intoxicating pull of avoidance. Without discipline, you are easy to steer because your compass isn't anchored. You're driven by feelings, which are fleeting, instead of by principles, which endure. And manipulators know this. They will wait until you're tired, emotionally depleted, mentally unfocused, because that's when your boundaries blur. That's when you start breaking promises to yourself. That's when you rationalize what you would have rejected at your strongest. And they never rush. They just wait. But when discipline lives in you, when it becomes part of how you breathe, decide, and act, your boundaries are no longer up for negotiation. You don't need to announce them. You don't need to defend them with drama. You simply embody them. You show up with a presence that communicates, I am not available for manipulation, because I already made the decision you're trying to distort. That kind of energy is not aggressive. It's calm, but it's immovable. And that is what breaks the spell of psychological control, consistency. Discipline is the muscle that lets you stay aligned when everything around you is pushing you off course. It is what lets you walk away from emotionally manipulative people not when you're angry, but when you're clear. It's what makes you keep your word to yourself, not because it feels good, but because you've decided that your future is more valuable than your feelings in any given moment. Discipline doesn't care about comfort. It is loyal to something deeper, your vision. And here's what most people get wrong. Discipline isn't about force. It's not about white-knuckling your way through life with gritted teeth and no rest. It's not about being robotic or ruthless. It's about becoming unshakable. It's about creating systems around your values so that your identity is reinforced by your behavior. Because if your identity is not supported by consistent behavior, it's just an idea. And ideas alone don't change your life. Action does. Repetition does. Structure does. Think of it like this. If you had to rebuild your life from the ground up, if everything familiar was stripped away, your job, your home, your relationships, what habits would still protect you? What routines would still carry you forward? What behaviors would keep you aligned with your values in the absence of applause or recognition? That is discipline. It's what remains when everything else is uncertain. Look at any powerful figure throughout history who endured pressure, criticism, chaos. What do they all have in common? They didn't just have vision. They had structure. They had routines. They had rituals. Not because they were rigid, but because they were protecting something sacred, their purpose. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire and still found time to reflect in writing every day. Because he understood that in the midst of politics, betrayal, and war, his internal order was the only thing he could control. Benjamin Franklin created a daily schedule down to the hour, not out of vanity, but because he understood that discipline is not a restriction on life, it's a multiplier of it. It gives you more time, more clarity, more focus, more integrity, because it filters out the noise before the noise filters out your soul. And let's be clear, manipulation is noise. It's a distortion of clarity, a disruption of alignment. And when you lack discipline, you become easy to distract. You give your energy to drama, to emotional cycles, to people who drain you with their inconsistency and demand that you manage their chaos. But when your life is disciplined, you stop being available for that. You don't even engage. Not because you're cruel, but because you're focused. And focus is the one thing a manipulator cannot survive. They thrive in confusion. Discipline kills confusion. So build your rituals. Create structure around your thinking. Stop waiting to feel ready and start acting from a place of decision. Because the manipulator is not waiting for you to get strong. They're counting on you to stay weak. Not because you're incapable, but because you've been sold the lie that discipline is punishment. It's not. It's freedom, dressed in responsibility. You want to stop being manipulated? Then stop outsourcing your stability. Stop looking to other people for emotional regulation. Stop using distractions as coping mechanisms. Get quiet. Get structured. Get intentional. Because that's the environment where you become immune, not just to toxic people, but to your own self-sabotaging impulses. That's when you stop negotiating with your excuses. That's when you stop trading your future for temporary comfort. And here's the irony. Once you develop discipline, You actually create more space for joy, for play, for rest. Because discipline creates efficiency. Gives you your time back, your mind back, your focus back. And when you're no longer wasting energy managing crisis after crisis, you suddenly have energy for what truly matters. But you must earn that freedom through structure. You must earn it through consistency. There's no magic in this. No secret code. No special technique. Just a simple principle: whatever you don't manage will manage you. Your time. Your energy. Your thoughts. If you don't bring them under conscious structure, they will be taken over by society, by manipulators, by your own fear-based conditioning. But when you take ownership, real, unapologetic ownership, you become untouchable. Not because you've built walls, but because you've built discipline. And that is a fortress no manipulator can enter. Chapter 8. The Alchemy of Action. There comes a moment when awareness is no longer enough, when clarity must be followed by motion, or it decays into comfort disguised as insight. We've all seen it happen. People read the books, attend the seminars, recite the affirmations, diagnose the patterns, talk endlessly about boundaries, gaslighting, trauma, self-worth, but they remain stuck, not because they don't understand, but because they don't move. They know exactly what needs to be done. They can feel it in their bones. But they don't act. And in that space between knowing and doing, manipulation regrows its roots. Because manipulation doesn't only survive on your confusion, it thrives on your hesitation. Action is the only language that change truly respects. It is the only thing that breaks the invisible contracts you've made with people who benefit from your silence. It's the only force that shifts the emotional gravity of your life from reactive to deliberate. And yet most people wait. They wait for the timing to be right. They wait for their emotions to stabilize. They wait to not feel scared or unsure or overwhelmed. But that day never comes. Because action isn't something you do after the fear leaves. It's the antidote that drives the fear out. You have to understand, manipulators are experts at sensing your thresholds. They know how close you are to leaving, to confronting, to choosing something else. And just when you get to that edge, they'll throw you just enough hope, just enough softness, just enough guilt to make you pause. And that pause? That's where you lose ground. Not because you're weak, but because they've mastered the art of interrupting your momentum. They understand that if they can delay your action, even by a day, they can reinsert doubt, recalibrate the dynamic, and regain the control they felt slipping away. That's why when the impulse to act hits you, you must move. You must trust that feeling of enough. That deep knowing that this situation, this relationship, this environment, this pattern, it ends now. Not later. Not after a few more conversations. Not after one more apology. Not after you feel more ready. Because the more you postpone the decision, the more likely it is that you will talk yourself out of it. There is no such thing as a neutral life. Every action either builds you or breaks you. And inaction is not neutral. It is silent agreement with whatever power dynamic you are currently in. If you are in a manipulative situation and you do not move, you are not just a victim. You are, unconsciously, a participant. That's the harsh truth. It doesn't mean you chose to be manipulated. It means that once you saw it and did nothing, you became part of the cycle. And the only way out is forward. Through action. Through decisions made in alignment with your truth, not your fear. But action is not just exit. It is also creation. It's not only about walking away from the toxic, it's about building what you were always meant to live in. That's where most people fail. They think breaking free is enough. But freedom without direction becomes chaos. You can't just escape the lie, you must build the truth. You must replace the manipulator's design for your life with one of your own. And that requires discipline, strategy, and sustained action, not just emotionally charged rebellion. It means changing your environment, reorganizing your habits, taking inventory of who you allow access to your energy. It means defining your non-negotiables and enforcing them without explanation. It means building new relationships, rooted in values, not convenience or nostalgia. It means waking up every day and making choices that reflect the future you say you want, not the comfort of the past you've already outgrown. Because people who manipulate are not afraid of your anger. They are afraid of your evolution. They are afraid of the version of you that no longer needs them. The version of you who no longer argues, who no longer explains, who no longer performs emotional labor just to maintain a fragile peace. They're not afraid of losing access to your body. They're afraid of losing access to your mind. And once you act from a place of sovereign identity, that access is closed forever. You have to become strategic with your energy. Action doesn't always mean confrontation. Sometimes it means silence. Sometimes it means disappearing. Sometimes it means building in the background until you no longer have to announce your departure, because your new life speaks so loudly that the old one no longer recognizes you. But no matter what form it takes, the essence of action is always the same. It is a declaration that your truth is more valuable than your comfort, that your integrity is more important than approval, that your evolution is more urgent than someone else's temporary satisfaction. It's the same mindset that built empires, that changed the world, that broke free from oppressive systems and redefined what was possible. No revolution, personal or political, ever happened without decisive, repeated action. The world doesn't reward those who almost change. It rewards those who take the step, then the next, even when they're afraid, even when they're doubted, even when they are misunderstood. There will always be a reason to delay. Always a voice telling you to wait. To be sure. To be nice. But you need to realize, every minute you spend in hesitation is a minute stolen by the manipulative patterns you've already identified. You've done the inner work. You've seen the truth. Now you move. Not because it's easy, but because you finally understand that you're worth protecting, even if no one else claps for it. So act. Say what needs to be said. End what needs to be ended. Begin what needs to be built. And most importantly, do it more than once. Because action is not a moment, it is a lifestyle. A repeated discipline of choosing what's aligned over what's available. Choosing what's honest over what's easy. Choosing what's real over what's safe. You don't just escape manipulation once. You outgrow it, every day, through action. Chapter 9. The Ground of Gratitude. Gratitude, when misunderstood, becomes a weapon used against your own clarity. Manipulators love nothing more than a person who has been conditioned to confuse gratitude with submission, because they know that if you can be trained to be thankful for less than you deserve, you'll stop asking for more. They know that if you define gratitude as the acceptance of whatever you're given, rather than the conscious acknowledgement of what aligns with your values, you'll become easy to trap, easy to keep quiet, easy to manage. That's the dark side of gratitude that no one talks about. The version sold by shallow self-help culture, wrapped in soft language, presented as humility, but designed to pacify. True gratitude is not passivity. It is not complacency. It is not a strategy to numb your discomfort and justify dysfunction. Real gratitude is aggressive in its clarity. It does not blind you to what's wrong. It sharpens your vision for what's right. It does not ask you to pretend everything is fine. It helps you stay grounded while you do the hard work of changing what isn't. Gratitude is not an escape from the truth. It is what keeps you steady enough to face it without collapsing under its weight. And when you are navigating a world of subtle manipulation, you need that kind of stability. Because manipulators don't just play with your mind, they play with your memory. They distort your sense of time, of fairness, of history. They weaponize your emotional highs and lows, your stress and exhaustion, until you forget what's real. They create psychological storms that make you doubt yourself, and then offer you relief, just enough to create dependency. And in the eye of that storm, gratitude becomes a kind of anchor. Not for them. For you. It becomes the mental practice of reclaiming focus from chaos. That's what most people miss. Gratitude is a discipline. It's a cognitive practice. Not a vague feeling. Not a temporary emotional wave. It is the act of deliberately orienting your perception toward what is true, real, and life-giving. Not to deny pain, but to regain power. Because when everything around you is designed to provoke, distract, and destabilize, gratitude becomes your internal compass, pointing you back to what actually matters. You must learn to practice gratitude strategically. You must train your mind to see what you still have. Your voice, your awareness, your values, your capacity to walk away, your ability to rebuild. Not as a way to excuse what's been lost, but as a way to activate what's still available. Because that's the mental terrain where confidence grows. Not in perfection. Not in the absence of struggle. But in the stubborn recognition that even in the midst of emotional warfare, there is still something in you that cannot be broken, manipulated, or bought. Think of Viktor Frankl, imprisoned in a Nazi concentration camp, stripped of everything he owned, everyone he loved, reduced to a number, living on the edge of starvation. And yet he found meaning, not through delusion or denial, but through conscious gratitude for the fragments of choice that remained. The way he chose to respond. The way he chose to hold onto his integrity. The way he decided again and again not to give his mind over to the machinery of dehumanization. Gratitude in that context was not soft. It was revolutionary. It was the mental armor that allowed him to maintain autonomy even in conditions designed to annihilate it. That is the kind of gratitude you must now develop. Not the Instagram version. Not the fluffy, performative checklist of things you pretend to be thankful for while suppressing rage, resentment, or despair. Real gratitude starts with truth. It begins where denial ends. It flourishes when you finally stop lying to yourself about how bad things are, how far you've drifted, or how deeply you've been conditioned to accept less than what you deserve. Gratitude, real gratitude, is born the moment you take full responsibility, not just for what happened to you, but for what happens next. Because here's the paradox. When you start truly seeing your life through the lens of gratitude, you become less tolerant of manipulation, not more. You start realizing that gratitude for life means protecting your time, your energy, and your peace. It means refusing to stay in situations that exploit your kindness. It means saying thank you for the lesson and goodbye to the lesson source. It means appreciating what someone once gave you while no longer allowing them to take from you. That's real gratitude, clear, mature, discerning. And you have to be ruthless in maintaining it. Because this world will pull you into emotional bankruptcy if you let it. There are people, systems, institutions that benefit from your distraction. They do not want you to focus on what's working. They want you fixated on what's missing, what's broken, what's wrong with you. Because a person in lack is a person who will overcompensate by overgiving, overperforming, over-apologizing, over-justifying their presence. But a person rooted in gratitude doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't panic, because they're not operating from scarcity. They're operating from conscious abundance, not abundance in material terms, but in awareness of what truly matters. So when the manipulator tries to gaslight you into thinking you're ungrateful, unappreciative, difficult, unstable, hold your ground. Thank them for showing you their true nature. Thank them for accelerating your awakening. And then use that awakening as fuel. Because gratitude, when integrated, becomes not just peace, but power. It becomes the force that stabilizes your identity so fully that no one can hijack it again. You're not grateful because everything is perfect. You're grateful because you're finally awake enough to choose. To leave. To rebuild. To see clearly. And that clarity? That's the true gift. That's the unshakable ground you stand on, while the rest of the world tries to pull you back into illusion. Chapter 10. Adaptability as Strategy. Adaptability is not weakness. It is not surrender. It is not the absence of backbone or the willingness to please. Real adaptability is one of the highest forms of intelligence, and in a world saturated with manipulation, it becomes one of the most powerful forms of defense. Not because it bends to pressure, but because it doesn't break under it. It is the ability to assess your environment, detect the shifts, sense the undercurrents, and recalibrate your behavior, not to lose yourself, but to protect your forward momentum. Adaptability is not about becoming whatever others want you to be. It's about knowing exactly who you are while being able to move through any environment without losing grip on your center. In psychological warfare, adaptability is your camouflage. It's what allows you to move undetected, to study the manipulator without becoming their target, to remain emotionally detached while they try to bait you into reaction. A rigid person can be broken easily, predictable, inflexible, idealistic without strategy. But a person who can adapt, deliberately, not reactively, is impossible to trap. Because they don't announce their plan. They don't reveal their hand. They simply observe, calculate, and shift. That kind of person doesn't become prey. They become a ghost in the system, moving too intelligently to be held down by emotional snares or identity traps. Most people are trained, consciously or not, to seek consistency not for the sake of principle but out of fear. They believe that to change direction is weakness, that to evolve is betrayal of their past self, that to outgrow someone means they've become disloyal. But nothing keeps you more vulnerable to manipulation than the idea that you must remain the same in order to be worthy. Adaptability requires that you be willing to change not because someone told you to, but because you've outlived a version of yourself. Because a set of behaviors, beliefs, or emotional defaults that once served you have now become liabilities. And you cannot afford to carry dead weight when you're trying to cross the bridge to your next level. Manipulators thrive on predictability. If they can count on your reactions, they can control you. If they know exactly which buttons to push, which words to say, which roles you'll fall back into, then you're no longer a person, you're a puppet. But when you adapt, when you stop responding the way you used to, when you no longer chase, no longer explain, no longer defend, something changes. The manipulator loses their map. Their strategy breaks down. Because the person they once manipulated is no longer there. You've become something they didn't expect, unreadable. This doesn't mean you fake your way through life. It means you stay fluid. You upgrade. You stop outsourcing your identity to fixed labels. You stop needing to explain your every decision through the lens of who you used to be. You let go of the belief that transformation must be linear or that your loyalty must be unconditional. Adaptability means you're loyal to your growth first, and everything else comes second. Look at nature. The strongest species are not the biggest, fastest, or most aggressive. They are the ones that adapt. The ones that can survive any terrain, any climate, any predator. That's what makes them resilient. That's what makes them last. Human beings are no different. The ones who thrive, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, are not those who know everything in advance, but those who can face uncertainty without losing their structure. And that's the key distinction. Adaptability is not the absence of structure. It's structure in motion. It's easy to spot manipulation in hindsight. What makes you powerful is spotting it in real time and adjusting your behavior without losing your mind. That takes mental agility, emotional discipline, self-awareness under pressure. And most importantly, it takes the ability to see reality as it is, not how you want it to be, not how someone else is trying to frame it, but how it actually functions beneath the surface. Because once you see reality clearly, you can begin to bend with it, rather than be broken by it. Think of historical innovators, those who survived impossible odds, not because they had more resources, but because they had the ability to adjust. Harriet Tubman didn't rely on a single method to free slaves. She adapted constantly, changing routes, tactics, communication, even disguises, based on who she was dealing with and what the terrain required. That wasn't luck. That was survival intelligence. That was adaptability as resistance. You must build that same muscle. You must learn to read the room, not just socially, but psychologically. You must observe the shifts in tone, timing, power dynamics. You must become fluent in silence, in energy, in pattern. And you must know when to speak, when to hold, when to pivot, and when to walk. Adaptability doesn't mean you trust everyone. It means you trust your ability to navigate anything. Manipulators hate this version of you. They prefer the fixed version, the one they helped shape, the one with predictable reactions and emotional vulnerability that can be triggered like a switch. They want the version of you that will play the role they assigned, the role you never agreed to but adopted to maintain peace. They want that version because it's easier to manage. But the adaptive version of you? That one is dangerous. That one stops asking for permission. That one doesn't beg for closure. That one exits conversations when they go nowhere. That one refuses to be pulled back into emotional loops. That one does not perform. You become dangerous to manipulators the moment you realize that their approval is irrelevant, their tactics outdated, their power over you expired. And instead of trying to win against them, you just leave the arena. That's adaptability. Choosing peace over performance. Choosing evolution over emotional entanglement. So don't mistake stubbornness for strength. Stubbornness is emotional rigidity masquerading as resolve. Real strength is the ability to pivot without losing your identity. It's the capacity to walk into any room and remain unshaken because your principles are mobile. They move with you. They aren't chained to circumstances or comfort zones. In a world of psychological predators, adaptability is not just a useful trait. It is a requirement. Without it, you're guessing. With it, you're calibrating. And when you're calibrated, you're not reacting, you're choosing precisely, moment by moment, how to engage, how to conserve energy, how to protect your values without needing anyone else's permission to do so. This is how you become unmanipulatable, not by becoming hardened, but by becoming fluid, adaptable, conscious, strategic, alive. Chapter 11. The Rebirth Through Resilience. Resilience is not about bouncing back. It's not about returning to who you were before the damage. It's not about pretending the hurt never happened or glorifying pain like it was part of some noble journey. True resilience has nothing to do with denial and everything to do with regeneration. It's the decision to rise not in spite of what was done to you, but because of it, using the wreckage not as a monument to your suffering but as raw material for your reconstruction. It's looking directly at what broke you and deciding, without bitterness or vengeance, that it no longer owns you. Most people misunderstand resilience because they think it's about resistance, about brute emotional force, about burying the past under layers of distraction and telling yourself you're fine. But that's not resilience. That's survival. And survival, while necessary in crisis, is not meant to be a lifestyle. Resilience is what begins after survival. When you stop being reactive, when the immediate threat has passed, and you're left standing in the quiet aftermath, looking around at the psychological mess, knowing that no one is coming to clean it up but you. That's when you discover who you actually are. The truth is, manipulation doesn't just distort your relationships. It distorts your reflection. It reshapes your self-image in microscopic ways, eroding your sense of reality, your judgment, your confidence. It rewires your emotional expectations. You start to believe that uncertainty is normal, that walking on eggshells is love, that hypervigilance is connection, that self-sacrifice is virtue. So when the manipulation ends, when the person leaves or you finally leave them, the war is not over. The battlefield simply shifts inside your mind. And this is the first truth you need to absorb. Healing is not passive. Resilience is not automatic. Just because the manipulator is gone doesn't mean their programming is. Their words live inside you. Their judgments echo in your decisions. Their values still distort your priorities. And if you don't become ruthlessly conscious of that fact, you'll continue to live in a cage that no longer exists, responding to chains that are no longer there. Resilience begins the moment you stop asking why they did what they did and start asking how you allowed yourself to stay. Not to blame yourself, but to reclaim your power. Because as long as your energy is focused on understanding their motives, you're still tangled in their web. But when you begin focusing on your own boundaries, your own wounds, your own patterns, that's when the shift begins. That's when the rebuilding starts. Because you can't control them, but you can take full ownership of your response. And ownership is the foundation of all resilience. The longer you cling to the story that says someone else is responsible for your healing, the longer you remain broken. But when you say, yes, they manipulated me, and now it's my job to rebuild what they tried to destroy, you re-enter your life with both hands on the wheel. You stop being a passenger in your own recovery and start being the architect of your rebirth. That process is not linear. It will require pain. There will be days when you feel stronger than you've ever been, followed by days when a scent, a song, a phrase, or a memory pulls you back into old pain like it never left. And that's not failure. That's recovery. That's your nervous system detoxing from an emotional poison it was never meant to carry. It takes time. It takes structure. And it takes conscious, daily choice. Not motivation, not hope, not inspiration, but discipline. Rebuilding your resilience means building routines that restore your identity. It means returning to the practices that anchor you: movement, breath, reflection, creativity. It means removing people who still speak the manipulator's language, even if they call themselves friends or family. It means getting quiet enough to hear your own voice again. Not the voice they molded, not the identity you adopted to survive, but the voice that's been waiting for space to speak. And it also means confronting your shame. Because one of the manipulator's most effective weapons is teaching you to feel ashamed of having been fooled. They count on your silence. They count on your pride. They count on your desire to look strong, to appear healed, to seem unbothered. But real resilience doesn't avoid shame. It faces it. It says, yes, I didn't see it coming. Yes, I stayed too long. Yes, I made mistakes. And now I know better. That kind of self-confrontation is not self-attack. It's self-liberation. Because once you've faced every shadow, every regret, every truth you tried to avoid, there is nothing left to hide from. And when there's nothing left to hide from, you become unbreakable. Not because you've armored yourself, but because you've integrated everything that once fractured you. And understand this: resilience doesn't mean you never get manipulated again. It means you catch it faster. You speak up sooner. You walk away earlier. You don't romanticize toxicity. You don't confuse intensity for intimacy. You don't entertain people who require your betrayal in exchange for their attention. Resilience means you carry wisdom now. Scars that remind you, not of what hurt you, but of what you learned. You become someone who cannot be broken the same way twice. And that's the difference between victims who stay stuck and survivors who evolve. The former keep asking for justice. The latter become justice. They stop seeking apologies. They stop chasing closure. They embody the closure. They build lives so aligned, so structured, so full of clarity that they never again attract what once almost destroyed them. That's where you're heading. Not back to who you were, but forward, to who you were always meant to become before the manipulation, before the conditioning, before you were taught to shrink. Resilience isn't about recovering the old you. It's about activating the version that never got the chance to breathe. And once that version is awake, the game changes forever. Chapter 12: Transcendence Beyond the Game. There is a point in your evolution where the manipulator's tactics no longer work. Not because you've outplayed them, but because you've outgrown the psychological architecture that gave their influence any weight in the first place. You no longer respond, not out of passivity or fear, but because the game itself no longer applies to you. The stage they've spent years performing on is now beneath you. The scripts they used to bait you, shame, guilt, seduction, confusion, they simply fall flat. Because you're not even in the room anymore. You've stopped being a character in their drama, and you've become the author of your own narrative. This is transcendence, not escape, not revenge, not avoidance, but the deliberate choice to rise above the frameworks that once bound you. It's not just that you're harder to manipulate. It's that you no longer require the patterns that made you vulnerable to manipulation in the first place. You've deconstructed the internal infrastructure that once made space for those dynamics. You've dismantled the craving for external validation, the unspoken need to be rescued, the unconscious pull toward people who echo old pain. You've replaced that architecture with a kind of sovereignty that is not loud or flashy or aggressive, but steady, grounded, immune. People think that healing means never attracting toxicity again. But the truth is more profound. You may still encounter manipulative personalities. You may still face situations that would have once triggered collapse, confusion, or self-abandonment. But now they pass through you. They arrive, and you observe, not reactively, not emotionally, but with the calm clarity of someone who has trained their nervous system not to see chaos as interesting or pain as familiar. You don't negotiate with it. You don't explain yourself to it. You simply recognize it for what it is and choose to disengage before it even begins. That's what transcendence looks like, not a constant battle to protect your peace, but a life so rooted in truth, clarity, and self-alignment that chaos cannot gain entry. Because at this level, your boundaries are not something you perform, they are something you are. They live in your presence, in your tone, in your silence. People feel them without needing to be told. And those who would once attempt to test you now walk away voluntarily, Not because you attacked them, but because your energy no longer permits the role they're trying to play. You've stopped being available for manipulation, not because you built thicker walls, but because you've become more transparent with yourself. You no longer hide in projection or self-denial. You've faced your own shadows. You've looked at the ways you used to participate in your own disempowerment, not to shame yourself, but to take responsibility. You've stopped expecting other people to fix, validate, or define you. And in that shift, you've become untouchable. Because the manipulator only has one true weapon: your need. They need you to need something they can provide: approval, attention, opportunity, affection. When that need disappears, so does their power. It doesn't matter how skilled they are. It doesn't matter how charismatic, seductive, or clever. When you are full from within, when your identity is self-generated, when your emotional center is self-regulated, when your standards are self-enforced, manipulation becomes useless. It has nowhere to land. It slides off you like oil off glass. And that's where you've arrived. Not in a perfect state of peace, but in a state of presence. You're awake now. You don't seek illusions because you've learned that illusions always carry a price. You don't chase intensity for the sake of emotion, because you know that drama and depth are not the same thing. You don't confuse noise for connection. You've matured past the need to be understood by people who don't even understand themselves. And you've stopped giving your energy to people who would rather play with your boundaries than respect them. This transcendence isn't about superiority. It's about alignment. You don't look down on others. You simply no longer lower yourself to meet them in games that cost you your peace. You don't need to punish anyone. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to teach lessons. You don't need to prove that you've healed. Your life proves it. Your silence proves it. Your refusal to be pulled back into dynamics that no longer serve your evolution, that's your closure. You don't need revenge. You need freedom. And you have it now. The people who once confused you don't scare you anymore. Their charm doesn't work. Their guilt trips don't land. Their tactics feel tired. You see them not as monsters, but as broken systems running outdated software. You wish them peace, because they have none. You don't take it personally anymore, because you realize it never was. You've detached not just emotionally, but existentially. And here's what happens when you reach this state. You begin to attract differently. You don't just change who you allow into your life. You change who is even drawn to you in the first place. Because manipulators don't want people they can't move. They want people who are still seeking, still empty, still unsure. And you are none of those things anymore. You walk with intention. You speak with purpose. You rest with integrity. You no longer rush toward connection out of loneliness. You let people reveal themselves over time. You observe more than you explain. You protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is. Transcendence is not the end of your healing journey. It's the beginning of your real life, the one where you're no longer ruled by reaction, fear, or the emotional residue of the past. It's the life where you move forward, not to prove anything to anyone, but because staying still would betray the person you've fought so hard to become. You've come through confusion and found clarity. You've passed through chaos and chosen discipline. You've endured manipulation and reclaimed your mind. You've faced your shame and stood back up in truth. You've dismantled false belief systems, rebuilt your boundaries, recalibrated your intuition, and taken action aligned with your deepest integrity. You've done what most people never do. You've turned the mirror inward and chosen growth over comfort, truth over illusion, power over performance. And now, you're free. Not just from the manipulator, not just from the game, but from the version of yourself that needed the game to feel worthy, seen, and strong. The war is over. You won.